know. I know it's a long episode, but it's worth it. Let's talk about why democracy is broken. Usually our titles are just hyperbole and they aren't meant to be taken literally, but this time around we are being literal. Democracy is broken for multiple reasons. And when I say reasons, I don't mean things like corruption or unequal representation or abuse of power. The real reasons are much more theoretical. And in this episode, we're going to be discussing three major reasons: asymmetrical polarization, centralization of power, and backsliding. Let's start with the first one. Asymmetrical polarization is basically a situation where one side of the political spectrum takes on a more superlative position. This could be because of multiple reasons. It could be because of overconfidence in the superiority of one's own theories. It could be because of a lack of tolerance. It could be because of provincial... Have you felt like one party in your country has become really extreme lately? Do you? Hey guys! Do you feel like this particular party is becoming noticeably more and more fundamentalist? Well, I have just the term for you. Asymmetric polarization. Click on our website for more facts about customers. I thought I told you this bit wasn't going to make it to the episode. What the fuck? Dude, you know what? Just remind me to fire the editor too. Oh yeah, and ask the sound guy to stop sitting outside my house. He's not getting his job back. I do not care how many starving children he has. Anyways, asymmetrical polarization is something that has affected a lot of democracies all across the world. The United States, Brazil, India, the United Kingdoms, the Philippines, Mexico, and many other countries have all elected leaders that are conservatives with an affinity for authoritarianism. In India itself, it's not hard to notice the stark difference between earlier BJP leaders like Atal Bihari Vajpayee and more modern ones like Amit Shah. But the Congress has remained more or less the same over time, while the BJP is moving further towards the right. So what's up with that? To answer that question, we're going to have to dive into a bit of history. The history filter. What the fuck?
I mean, you fired the editor, so...
Oh, for fuck's sake.
I don't know.
Fine.
No.
Bring him back.
Yeah, sorry.
There are three major differences between the BJP under Vajpayee and Advani and the BJP under our beloved boys Modi and Amit Shah. Unlike our evil teddy bear duo, Vajpayee was far more democratic in his interaction with the BJP's allies. And in fact, when Vajpayee came into power, instead of indulging in the rampant bashing of the Congress party, he even tried to extend his hand across the aisle. And now I know that sounds extremely naive to the cynical worldview that we possess today, but by rallying their voters staunchly against the Congress party, our beloved boys were able to hide their Hindutva agenda deftly behind these continuous partisan squabbles. Advani even created a second generation of leaders that included Prime Minister Narendra Modi, Arun Jaitley, Sushma Swaraj, etc. Whereas a majority of the current chief ministers appointed by the Modi's administration are envoys of the PM instead of leaders of their own right. The only exceptions to that rule are Yogi Adityanath and Shivraj Singh Chauhan. So you know what? I'm going to take my sentence back. No, good job. Actually, great job. There is no reason whatsoever to foster leadership. Good job. Lastly, and perhaps most importantly, the BJP and its leaders, from their very formative years, have always made a lot of efforts to indulge and interact with the media, all up till the advent of Modi, who refuses to interact with the press. The few interviews that he has done, he answers very difficult questions about wallets and mangoes. But how have we reached here? One could argue that it's just ingrained in Modi's personality because he's always had an authoritarian streak to him, which is very evident from his tenure as the Chief Minister of Gujarat. Couple that up with a majority Hindu population that has always felt underrepresented and abandoned, And it's not that surprising to see how much Modi has changed the party. Modi was elected on the promise of a stronger India by appealing to a younger, more aggressive voter. And so his theatricality and his enigmatic qualities aren't just accidents, they're tools. Tools he uses to symbolize more than he says and more than he does. In essence, Modi and Shah aren't where they are just because of their personalities, but it's because an overwhelming amount of our population wants this. They're not the leaders we need, they're the leaders we deserve. Oh, really got carried away with that one, didn't I?
Yeah, no, we can't rip that off. No, I didn't. Sorry, no. No one gets mad.
See, what we fail to understand here is that the movement to the right and the rise of conservatism wasn't invented by Modi. It was weaponized by him. Its fundamental cause lies in a vote bank that thought it was on the periphery of the Indian political system for over 7 decades. A vote bank that looked at Kashmir and didn't understand why it required a special status. A vote bank that thought that the government would always be swamped in corruption, and most importantly, a vote bank that really hated Pakistan. The upper caste Hindus. Oh yeah, and it is just the upper castes, by the way. A majority of the chief ministers appointed by Modi's administration belong to higher castes. Modi is also considered a catalyst because of the spike of crimes committed against Dalits all across the nation. He's also tried to reduce the reservations for lower caste students and employees. So the BJP could try to convince you that they care about all Hindus, but no. Do not offend them by just calling them Islamophobic. My god, yaar. So rude. You have to call them classist and casteist too. That actually leads us to our second huge problem: centralization of power. Modi has won the national elections both in 2014 and in 2019 with a majority that is unprecedented in our nation's history. That in itself is concerning, but when it's put into context, it's even more worrying. India is a notoriously diverse country with multiple ethnic, religious, and cultural groups. And that's why we can only coexist harmoniously in a democracy, because it's a federal structure that allows everyone to come together, respects everyone, and expects everyone to compromise to each other. But Modi's success represents a group that forms the majority but refuses to compromise. Add to that their resentment to minority communities like the Muslims and indifference to lower caste communities. And what are we left with? With all of the power in the one group of the population. And now some of you might think that that's okay, but where we go wrong is our fundamental understanding of a democracy. In a democracy, the majority can't do anything that they want to do with the minority. Sure, they get to select the ministers, but the ministers have to serve everyone, right? That's just like saying, just because 80% of your friend circle consists of extroverts, you just don't invite the rest of them when you hang out. Like, sure, if you ask them, they might say no, or they might show up really anxiously and awkwardly. They might try to be a part of every single conversation with absolutely no content to contribute, but you have to invite them, right? You have to. Please invite me. Please, them. Please invite them. Please. What's scary to me though is that I know how obvious what I'm saying is. I know how cliche it is to say that a democracy represents everyone, and yet I have to say it. Because the Indian democracy isn't there right now. The Indian democracy is backsliding. Backsliding is basically a situation where democratic systems and institutions fall to autocracies or dictatorships. Up until the Cold War, the falling of a democracy was a process that was violent, it was visceral, and most importantly, it was visible. But that's not the case for modern democracies. Modern democracies don't die out fast and loudly. They're very quiet. So quiet that you can hardly hear them. And if you think I'm exaggerating, consider this. The Congress party was in a similar situation in the 60s and 70s in India. Indira Gandhi was the most famous national leader. And she had a massive majority in the central government. And As I'm sure you recall, that didn't end really well for a lot of people, did it? Three strategies often used by authoritarian leaders are denying the legitimacy of their opponents, tolerating or encouraging violence, and showing the willingness to curtail the civil liberties of their opponents. After 2017, the Election Commission literally kept the election dates a secret until the last minute and then went ahead to disqualify 20 candidates from a competing party. Yogi Adityanath, the Chief Minister of Uttar Pradesh, has literally called for the removal of Muslims from our country. Crimes against journalists have gone through the roof. Several activists have been imprisoned after the CAA NRC protests. General Bipin Rawat, India's Chief of Defence Staff, has literally spoken about the requirement of de-radicalization camps for young Kashmiris at international conferences, and he later went on to speak about how such camps already exist in India. Yeah. Denying the legitimacy of your opponents, tolerating or encouraging violence, and showing the willingness to curtail the civil liberties of your opponents. The Indian democracy is broken, but it's not alone. For our season finale, we'll be talking about the same issues, but on a global perspective and its consequences. See you next week.